Hello to everyone who love rock music. Talking about country, rock history of which will be discussed today. You know, there is a series of jokes and a lot of them sounding like you are for sure living in New York if, or you are 100% Italian if. If we substitute in a joke like this, the country which will be discussed in this episode, you get the following. You are citizen of this country if under the phrase go to see, you have in mind a trip of 15 minutes. You are living in the capital of this country if each year you have 3 months of summer, 3 months of winter and 6 months of autumn. And you 100% live in the capital of this country if you won't be surprised to meet on the street Sherlock Holmes, Dr. Watson, or even Professor Moriarty. No need to have deductive method of famous Sherlock Holmes. Today we will talk about elementary Latvia. It's time to visit it. Laipni lūdzam Latvija. Welcome, rockers. And with Latvian rock music, I met a long time ago, even before the trip. And here, of course, we must thank the band Brainstorm, music videos which could often be found on Ukrainian television. Also, the songs on the radio and TV, concerts in Ukrainian cities, one of them I even visited. Their famous hits with the band B2. But this is present nowadays. The history of rock music in Latvia is much deeper and more ancient. In 2013 I was in Latvia as a tourist, but saw, unfortunately, not all. It's time to catch up what I was missed previous time and to look closer. So, after the Second World War, Latvia itself unwillingly becomes part of the USSR, and it turns out that at the start of the Cold War, Latvians is included in the socialist camp. The Cold War confrontation used not just weapons. As the front, they used different things like TV, cinema, fashion, music and much more. Rock was born about the middle 50s and certainly not in a Sovok, where the culture has to sing odds, party leaders and socialism. It is logical that in rock music Soviet leadership saw something hostile as a threat, and propaganda demonized it in all ways. Rockers and rock bands, for them, addicts, idle and degenerates. And those who listen to them fans of rock music, they even worse. The reason for such attitude is simple: fear. Rock is for a strong and free people, and of these people, difficult to mold ideal citizens and builders of bright tomorrow. That's why rock music appears and develops in the Soviet Union much later than in other countries. Three Baltic countries, Latvia, Lithuania and Estonia, stuck in USSR later than other republics. That's why in USSR they was the most advanced, cutting edge. They were hip and trendy aliens for citizens of other Soviet republics. How in the 50s and 60s you can learn about what is now fashionable in other countries. Hear rock and learn about new trends and subcultures. Living in the USSR, it was very difficult to learn more about the life and culture of other countries. Almost all the information from abroad was banned or censored in the Soviet Union. Also, the citizens of Soviet republics were not able to communicate with the citizens of other countries. But some information still leaked out. This information, ideas, were in the air, not just in the literal sense of the word. We had only to catch them. These ideas or information in the air I talked about, it was about radio waves from Europe that penetrate through the Soviet border. On them, these radio waves could hear alternative news and early rock hits, but to hear them in the USSR and accordingly in Latvia was not always easy. Know-how of the Savok was the Iron Curtain, as opposed to the openness of Western society. Logically, Western television and radio programs to watch and listen was banned for a Soviet citizen because he would have seen the normal roads, food in supermarkets instead of empty shelves in USSR. And the worst, the normal music. Well, against which 95% of the Soviet official music was likely that what the cat does in the litter box. In short, the Iron Curtain was to protect the people from the truth. But people still managed to watch and listen to Western music. There are things that cannot be contained by any restrictions. If you do not have a choice and you would really like to see or listen to your favorite song on the prohibited channel, then you would become Edison, Tesla or Marconi too. Soviet people wanted to look on Western life at least a little bit. Often they made a homemade antennas to hear what they like. On the USSR worked several radio stations, breaking information blockade, like Radio Free Europe or Voice of America. Here communist regime called the interference with his radio space hostile voices and tried to deal with this as with all other points of view different from the official. Along the border were deployed even special stations to jam enemy signals. Why am I telling all this? For the understanding of how difficult sometimes given a different point of view. Only underground way Soviet citizens could hear one of the first rock hits that penetrates the Soviet Union. As I said, radio stations were different and they were many. But on the formation of rock culture in Latvia, the greatest contribution from all radio waves gave Radio Luxembourg. This station from a small European country deserves a few words, cause it played a significant role in popularization of rock music. That's not only about Latvia and other prisoners of evil empire. Radio Luxembourg played a significant role in the development of rock culture, even in the country of the Beatles, in the United Kingdom. Radio Luxembourg was one of a major impetus to the development of rock in Latvia, was a call to action. So, rock arrives to the Red Empire late, and here in Latvia arrives in the early 60s. And Riga, capital of Latvia, will become a cradle of the copying and distribution Western music in the territory of the Union. I talked in one of the past episodes about how in the USSR worked underground industry of copying modern Western music on the ribs. Homemade plates made of X-ray photographs. Riga becomes the first of major centers of such copying. The scheme is as follows. First, the music is recorded from Western radio broadcast, such as Radio Luxembourg. Also, a lot of music on license vinyl got here, so some copies made from them. Latvia, maritime country, and there are many ports. So, sailors often brought music here. Migrants and friends from other countries often asked sailors, and sailors handed parcels to relatives in Latvia from abroad. And these parcels often included a vinyl plates of rock music. And what about KGB and border guards? Well, let's say sailors have always known how to bring goods passing the border guards and officials. Yes, friends, I'm talking about smuggling. And here at the clandestine studios, many copies was made and diverged through the USSR. Generally, here in Riga unfold whole underground micro-industry which made homemade speakers and amplifiers. In this micro-production, they were pioneers. A little later, here are officially produced one of the first electric guitars and first drum kits in Union. Even more interesting things produced here. Behind me, one of the buildings of the plant Radiotechnica or RRR, one of the giants of Soviet-made radio speakers and much more. Electronics, one of the radios that they produced had a surprise. Radiogram Sakta, which was produced by Radiotechnika, had one undocumented function. If you press at the same time while switching ranges buttons KV1 and KV2, the receiver will tune himself on the 19-meter range of frequencies. That's how one of the creators of that radio helped millions of Soviet citizens to listen to the forbidden radio. Still unknown whether it happened accidentally or it was such information sabotage against the Soviet regime. Summing up the above, we can say that Latvia has made a great contribution to the development of rock music both at home and around the all Soviet Union, not only by creating the music. It also provides a lot of technical capabilities for others to listen and create music on their own. Now it's time to say about musicians. According to one of the biggest experts in the history of rock music of the former USSR, Artemy Troitsky, rock first appeared in the Slovak here. In the USSR included 15 republics. Latvia was the first in all USSR where a rock band was born. They band called Revengers. The band gathered at the end of 1961, and it was also the first band, one of the most important persons in the history of Latvian rock, Valerij Saifuddinov. Valerij is considered the first rocker of USSR, and the band Revengers, respectively, considered the first rock band. That impulse that brought Valerij to rock music was the song When the Saints Go Marching In, performed by Harry Belafonte. He heard it in the Soviet propaganda movie. Then Valerij learned to play guitar and sing this song. While watching a movie in the cinema many times in a row, and even missed school for this. Then he played this song for friends in the park. From her name of the song and his own nickname, cause no one knew how to pronounce name of the song correctly in English, and options were Ohwen Dusey or Ohwen Lusensky or just Siensky. Next, Saifuddinov finds some guys who also love to play American rock and roll on acoustic guitars. As I said in one of the past episodes, musical instruments of the first rock bands of USSR were often improvised or handmade. Revengers were not exception. Without electric guitars, it is difficult to imagine rock music. Well, nowadays, yes, but not in the past. Soviet Union started to produce own bad-made electric guitars only at the end of the 60s. Also in the middle 60s, here in USSR, appeared electric guitars from Warsaw Pact countries, well, Czechoslovakian for example. But once again,
they were extremely rare.
And the price too high for high school students.
But in the same 1961, from one sailor, Valery got Fender guitars catalog and for a first time saw electric guitar in details. So he decided to make an electric guitar by own hands. He cut guitar body from wood, copying shape of Fender's Stratocaster, attached neck from acoustic guitar. Then friends added a piano strings and electronics from Czechoslovakia, and it works!
It's alive! It's alive! It's alive! It's alive!
It's alive! Alive!
Revengers didn't have their own material. They play covers of Little Richard, Chuck Berry, Elvis Presley, Ray Charles, Fats Domino, Carl Perkins.
Their English was not perfect, but they are soon became underground legend in Riga.
They played at dances, in schools, and once in 1962 they were invited to play on New Year's concert at the factory for the workers. Workers never heard something like this before, but they were delighted. But the authorities were shocked, and the director tried to turn off the electricity to end the concert. He climbed onto the stage and shouted.
All ended well. Workers make him drunk of alcohol to half-death, and he no longer bothered.
The history of the band ended in 1965 when the Red Army mobilized Valery. After the army in 1968, he formed a new band with his friend Pete Anderson. The new band called Natural Product.
The band was extremely popular among young people, and so the government prohibits it in 1970 without the right to sing.
Tired of opposition from the KGB and other things, Valery decides to immigrate from the USSR, which was difficult but possible. In partying, he played several concerts with friends in band called 3½.
In 1975, Sayfutdinov is finally in the United States, where he continued to make music, becomes a citizen, opens his own studio called Flight 19 Studio.
It is interesting that in the US he becomes a friend and mentor of Eddie Vedder, lead singer and guitarist of the band Pearl Jam. It's interesting how sometimes closely intertwined all in the history of rock music.
Name of the other rock legend of Latvia has already sounded. That's Pete, real name Peteris Anderson.
In childhood, he learned to play the piano. He listened to the show called Jazz Hour on a Forbidden Radio, Voice of America. Song that brought him to rock and roll was Freddie Cannon's Chattanooga Shoeshine Boy that he heard on a homemade plate. After school was a short education in electromechanical college.
Pete was expelled from college for the performance of Little Richard song long, tall Sally, and for the fact that he broke something. The real holy grail of communists, their Ark of the Covenant, their Shroud of Turin. It was bust of Lenin.
In parting, they called him anti-communist element, and his love for Western culture they called deviation. The first band that Pete creates called the Melody Makers, 1964. The name of the band was taken from the United Kingdom music newspaper Melody Maker, which sometimes got in Latvia with sailors.
The band sang in English and only classic of rock and roll. They quickly became wildly popular among young people.
They play at weddings, school dances, and sometimes on birthdays that actually often were not real and were a cover for an underground concert. Owners of stages where the band played, like school principals for example, sometimes treated positively, sometimes called the police, that dispersed heated crowd and break off concert.
It was totalitarianism, and people feared for their lives. For these concerts could blame the anti-Sovietism.
Often the Melody Makers play their concerts right here, Art Academy of Latvia, cause the leadership of the academy was liberal for rockers and rock concerts. When Pete Anderson played with the guys at the academy, the fans tried to break inside with all ways, through the toilet windows, roof, basements, by bribery or by assault. KGB tried to shut their mouth in any possible way they could, and this led in 1965 to something extraordinary for the Soviet Union: action of music protest in support of musicians.
Young people, and not only, defended the musicians.
And it happened here, Nativity Cathedral, Riga. At communist times, there was Home of Science and Planetarium, where the Melody Makers concert was to be held.
Suddenly, 30 minutes before the concert, announced that the concert is cancelled. But fans not even think to leave.
And then the band decided to play an acoustic concert on the steps of the planetarium directly to their fans. Right here. Improvised concert lasted several hours. The crowd held up posters, makers, and freedom to guitar. Came new people. Passers-by joined to the concert. By the way, this sudden refusal of concert officials explained by the fact that the band has no right to sing if its repertoire at last on 80% not consists of Soviet songs.
Such a fake reason.
KGB officers did not intervene in the action, but secretly filmed the participants, and unfortunately many of them were got later significant problems for the support of musicians.
In 1966, the band breaks. And Pete moved to Estonia, where he joins the band Optimisted. Estonia was much more free for rockers.
Anderson returns to Riga in 1968 and creates a band Natural Product with a friend, Valery Saifudinov. After the band's concerts in Pskov, Russia and Vilnius, Lithuania, they were arrested again for a while and got a new pages in their dossier.
They were so popular, they were considered such a big problem. So even if the police at that time in Latvia arrested some young person, the first question they asked was, "Do you know Pete and Zienski?"
Pete himself, constantly summoned for questioning to the KGB, he was threatened, accused in playing wrong music. In 1972, he had to go to United Kingdom to sing at the festival Rock and Roll Revival show next to Jerry Lee Lewis, Little Richard, Fats Domino, Bill Haley. But the Soviet authorities refused to let him go abroad and even began to threaten reprisals against his family.
Fearing for the health and lives of loved ones, he poses for almost 10 years.
But for what are friends for if not to help in a difficult times? Old friends from band Optimisted invited him to a concert of the new Estonian rock band Rock Hotel, where suddenly pulled him on stage to sing.
It was like a blow defibrillator, and he came alive. So in 1982 appears band Pete Anderson and the Archives.
At the start, his new band also had difficulties, but in 1985 they are allowed to play officially for the first time on TV show.
Now nothing won't stop him.
They, the main sensation of the Riga festival, Bildes 86. Next city, Liepāja, where on the festival Liepājas Dzintars 87 they played encore for an hour. Victories of the band continued with tours to Sweden and Denmark.
In 1989, Pete became a member of the Swedish Rock and Roll Club.
In the 90s, Archives actively toured Europe, performing on the stage with idols of Anderson's youth, as Bill Haley's Original Comets or Ventures. The band exists until 1995, and in 1996, Anderson creates band Pete Anderson and the Rhythm Kings.
By the way, Pete is the only musician from Latvia and all ex-USSR whose name is written in the Rockabilly Hall of Fame. For what?
He returned the original sound of classic rock and roll and inspired young people to play and listen to rockabilly. In 2009, the album Brass-a-billy is recognized the best in the genre of rockabilly according to Just Playing Folks Music Awards, Nashville, Tennessee, USA. Pete Anderson toured in the United States and in his native Latvia. He organized rock festivals. He opened rock clubs.
Such is unusual and interesting life.
The peculiarity of Latvian rock in the 60s was that the bands played only covers on Western bands. At that time, between Latvian musicians, playing own material or inventing something was considered as a sign of bad taste.
Living in the Slovak, it was hard to imagine that you can play at the level of your idols. But that was only at the beginning.
Besides Valery Siensky and Pete Anderson, in the 60s rock in Latvia played a half-dozen bands, such as the band Apples, who played covers on Led Zeppelin and Deep Purple. The band Eolica played covers on the Beach Boys and in 1968 performed at the competition of beat music called Big Beat in Kyiv, Ukraine.
Beat music played band Dreamers, performing songs of the band Shadows from the UK.
The famous Latvian band Cathedrals appeared in the middle 60s, was originally a cover band of the Beatles, but at the end of the 60s they and band 2 Cross BBM were the first who started to create their own material.
Thanks to these two bands, rock sounded for the first time in the Latvian language.
This fact did not like the authorities, and the story of these two bands was shorter than it could be. Communists forbid them.
From the 70s, center of rock culture moves from Riga right here, in the city called Liepāja. In translation, it means a place where wind was born. Well, my friends, it was the place where not only wind was born.
This city, not without purpose, called a capital of Latvian rock and Latvian Liverpool. By the way, with Liverpool in the United Kingdom, Liepāja really have a lot in common. First, both port cities. Second, both are in the west of their countries. Third, both cities have made a considerable contribution to the development of rock music of their countries.
It all started in 1964. This concert place behind me called Putveini. It's situated in large and very beautiful park near the Baltic Sea called Jūrmalas Parks. This concert place was built exactly in 1964 and one very important for rock music event started right here. Then there was founded an annual music festival, Liepājas Dzintars.
Since the beginning, the festival wasn't conceived as a rock festival. There was no certain genre, and you could hear at the festival ballads, jazz, and even folk.
Everything changed exactly in 1970. In 1970, there were two rock bands, 2X BBM and Santa.
Organizers sympathized to rockers as well as visitors of the festival. Rock at that days was a form of cultural opposition to the system. but also for a citizen of the USSR then. Here, rock was similar to ride the Ferrari for a first time after some old junk.
This gave strong emotions, always wanted more.
The government therefore treated with caution to the festival, and because of that, annual festival in some years on their ban was not conducted.
Festival Liepājas Dzintars turned out to be tenacious and therefore survived after the communist regime.
And since 1970, here rockers often performed and won.
Liepāja gave to world and country a great number of remarkable musicians and of course a lot of rockers. Once here opened even alley of fame of these musicians, and first rock cafe of Latvia was opened right here behind me.
One of the most iconic rockers of Liepāja is of course Latvian Scorpions band Levy.
The band appears in 1976 and evolving from playing beat music to hard rock and finally heavy metal.
The first songs of one of the founders of the band, Juris Pavitlos, were already written in 1972. One of the songs was called Щиты, in translation shields, and this name had to become the name of the band, but official bureaucrats banned this name as too belligerent.
The second version of the name for band, Alter Ego, was also banned as too Latin.
In the end, they came to the name Levy.
You know, friends, if we imagine that this stupid censorship system were in countries where rock music began, then we would never see names like Metallica, Megadeth or Slayer as too brutal.
Instead of them, we would have names like Spring Flowers, Loving Heart and Bunny. Okay, back to our band. A hard sound comes to the band with the arrival in the late 70s Eriks Kigelis, big fan of Jimi Hendrix.
In such composition in 1980, they won at the national competition.
Later in 1982, the band will leave one of the founders of the Levy, Juris Pavitlos, creating a band Saime. In the second half of the 80s, Levy finally transferred to hard rock.
And this band survived perestroika and difficult 90s by continuing to release new albums, create, act.
Another interesting band from the 70s, the real art rock band Menuet. The band remembered because of rock ballads about Mattison, and in 1971 they won the festival Zolotaya Осень or Golden Autumn in Baku, Azerbaijan.
Style of the band, the use of interesting and unusual for rock music instruments for that time, like flute, oboe, violin, trumpet or English horn.
In 1977 appears band called Arca, and in its arms was rare at that time musical instrument, synthesizer, a rare of course for the country of victorious socialism.
Later, the name of the band changed to legendary Zodiac.
This band appears here at the Jāzep Vītols Latvian Musical Academy at the Department of Electronic Musical Instruments.
Their music, a fusion of academic and electronic sound mixed with instrumental rock. Justifying its space name, the band once made the soundtrack to the documentary film about space.
The first album of Zodiac came in 1980. Then another few albums that bought around the USSR in millions of copies.
In the 90s, the band ceases to operate, but in 2010 again start to sing, and that is good news. Now a few words about the Latvian rock outside Latvia. In the early 70s in Sweden is formed Latvian band Dundurus, which distribute their music through Latvian diaspora of Sweden, USA, Germany.
Listen to this band live or their records in the Latvia then at that time. For obvious reasons was impossible.
Bands in the 70s of course arises more than in 60s. This, for example, Ziemeļblazma, Modo, Credo, LSP, Corpus and Riga's band Opus, which with its covers on Jimi Hendrix took first place at the rock festival in Estonian Viljandi in 1975.
Comes the last decade of Sovok. Latvia in the 80s is time of changes and fateful events.
In the early 80s, in 1981, in Riga arises band Zievišķie Pastinieki, Yellow Postmans, that made popular in Latvia new wave.
By the way, it would be great if the real postmans had yellow uniform.
It would be really awesome if they, like these guys, were rockers too.
I'd just love them then. Much more. I would often went to the post office.
Their style is hard to classify, because in addition to alternative and electronic, there is also rap and reggae. One program they never played twice.
Founded, the band was in the walls of this institution by students of Riga State Gymnasium number 1. By the way, is one of the oldest educational institutions in Latvia, and its history stretches back to 12-11 years.
At the beginning, Zievišķie Pastinieki played covers on Bob Marley and The Police at dances and discos. Then they start to work with own material.
Their albums they release by recording music at home on cassettes.
Cassettes distributed and were not signed, without covers, but everybody knew who recorded on them. The music was very recognizable.
Curiously, in the 80s and 90s, they create multiple albums and released them officially. only in 2003, after more than 20 years.
This approach to the release of their albums did not prevent them from becoming wildly popular and to affect on large number of listeners and musicians.
Another interesting part of the band's work is writing music for theater productions, such as Alice in Wonderland.
In the 80s arise many new bands, and here are some examples. Elpa, Юмбрава, Стоп Кран, Дубль 5, Ремикс, Зигзаг, Линга, Opus Pro.
In the 80s, several Latvian bands and musicians turned to the genre of rock opera. Example, the band Perkuns performed the rock opera EU's tour, and not only.
In 1988 appeared is one of the most epic rock operas, Large Places, Zigmara Liepina. The world is changed rapidly in the USSR and Latvia respectively, braving changes that are felt in many things, in the mood of the people and above all in rock music.
Since the beginning of perestroika in the middle 80s, this process are accelerated, and those walls that once seemed unbreakable become brittle.
In addition to the emergence of new genres and bands, 80s in the music got something new: protest. Now in 80s it is not uncommon. In general, rock music is one of the few genres for which protest is natural and normal, even not so much a protest as a different point of view.
One of the reasons I personally like rock, it's for this music is like saying to you, you are not like everyone, that's okay, that's fine, and nothing bad in it.
So, for the 60s, was the norm simply copying best Western rock? In the 70s, the topics for already owned songs were often for peace in the world or let's love each other, similar to the hippie ideas. In the 80s, especially after the 1985, protest lyrics fills the music.
In the songs now can be heard impossible for the best. Themes like return the historical names to our streets. We do not want to live in the old way. Communists party, go to hell.
Here comes heavy metal on the plates from West and performed by Soviet bands, and with it new subcultures as metalheads and punks.
And about the subcultures, in 1986 filmed Latvian documentary film Is It Easy to Be Young?
It's about young people, about their conflicts with society, about subcultures, rock music, rockers and punks. Also, we can see a concert of Latvian rock band Perkuns in the beginning of the movie.
This is a good movie if you want a deeper understanding of that era. Watch it.
In the 80s, here comes another whole Soviet trend: the emergence of rock clubs. In a small, compared with other capitals of Soviet republics, Riga appeared two of them. The first in 1983.
History of this rock club started from underground concert in the village Цього near Riga.
Next place for club became club called Dzintarpils in Zemlyablazma and conference hall in Latgiprostroytrans on Kristiana Valdemara 38th Street.
Also, one of the later addresses of rock club was a library on Alexander's Chuck's 30th Street.
This club brings together different people. Those who sing in different languages, have different cultures, but all united by one: rock music. So, thanks to Andrei Yahimovich, leader of the bands Цемент and Поезд ушел, appeared the place where you can share experience, listen your favorite music, or learn how to play.
Right here, in Soviet times, in this arc was a cafe, even restaurant called Allegro, and this was the main place of discussions, hangouts, and of course playing music of this rock club.
Bands from club touring the USSR and welcome guests. And in 1987, a concert in Riga Rock Club even shown on television.
Second rock club in Riga opened right here in the walls of University of Latvia in 1986. It also hosts lectures, hangouts and concerts.
Now here is the feature of Latvia that strongly distinguishes it from other republics of the Union. In 1984, in Latvia, was the 8th Republican contest of amateur bands.
But most of the bands wasn't from the cities, but from rural areas.
Basically, world rock culture centers are large cities like New York, London, Tokyo, where the subcultures, studios, clubs and arenas, well, space to deploy. There is a stereotype that village residents perceive something new slower because they do not absorb modern civilization with breast milk as residents of cities.
However, for Latvian farmers, love to the song was always one of the foundations of their lives.
That is why from their numbers were so many capable and inclined to music, including rock music. There was a joke in Latvia at that time about this situation. Sounds like Ministry of Culture harvest what the Ministry of Agriculture planted.
And at the very end of the 80s, in 1989, appears the band, not to say about which, is like talking about the history of rock in United Kingdom. But don't say about the Beatles or the Rolling Stones.
Not in Riga, not in Liepāja, and somewhere between them, in Jelgava, born Prata Vietra, more commonly known as Brainstorm.
Incidentally, it was the first Latvian band that I discovered for myself, and it was in the early 2000s.
Nowadays, it is most known rock band outside Latvia. But of course, they have not become so immediately. Their first album comes out in the early 90s. Then another one. In 1997, they are the owners of Gold Disc in Latvia. Although only a few years ago, the sales of their singles numbered only a few hundred copies.
In year 2000, Brainstorm takes third place at Eurovision in Stockholm, Sweden.
Then comes Breakthrough. Each band has a song that is some kind of their own business card. Something that everyone recognizes from the first chord.
For example, I can sing da 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 da, and all understand that it comes to the purple. I can just say, show must go on, and we all immediately recall about the band Queen.
So for Brainstorm, it's the song Maybe. And so happened that after this song, the band history divided for the period before Maybe and the period after Maybe. This happened in 2001.
After that, the band tours extensively, writing new albums, makes videos.
Here are some famous festivals where they were invited. South by Southwest, Austin, Texas, USA, Нашествие, Russia, Ziget, Hungary, Rock for People, Czech Republic, Eurosonic, Netherlands. What can be said about native Latvia? At home, they own attendance record for a concert. In 2008, their concert was visited by 45,000 fans.
At the time when this material was filmed, in 2016, the band announced concerts in United Kingdom, neighboring Lithuania, Estonia, Russia, and even future documentary film about the band.
I could not add here nothing more. That's great, and it make rockers' heart beats faster. Keep it up! Finally comes 90s. Ronald Reagan said that the Soviet Union will be sent to the junkyard of history, and he kept his word. After both tragic and heroic events, Latvia comes in 90s as an independent state.
With the disappearance of Savok, disappears the press that crushed the society and most creative people in it. Disappeared concept of forbidden music or forbidden radio.
Disappeared concept of forbidden musicians. Bands and musicians from abroad who were not allowed in the USSR now can visit ex-USSR and Latvia. Now in Latvia we can see concerts of world stars such as Metallica, Muse or Guano Apes.
Now a few words about modern music festivals that started here since independence.
Latvia, as always, confirms its status as singing nation. There is a festival to suit every taste here. You can visit the jazz festival or folk music, but if your goal, like mine, is heavy music, then we have some options like Positivus, the biggest festival from all. Here are a few stages and different genres.
Rock stage, of course, also present.
In Liepāja, from 2006, held 100% rock festival, Fontaine Festival.
And here is the place of this festival in city of Liepāja. So rock traditions is very strong here, and this is awesome.
There is a rock festival Klang for those who love very heavy, as a heavy metal, death metal or black metal. And also festival Saldus Saule.
All festivals take place in summer and mainly outdoors.
Here you can meet modern Latvian rock and rock legends of Latvia, which started back in the days when good man in uniform could grab you and guide light lamp in the eye to ask, "Do you know Pete and Tsienski?"
Another moment of 90s who has a relation to Latvia, United States of America and rap metal.
In the early 90s in the US, start his musical career son of immigrants from Latvia, Leons Dimants or DJ Lethal. He is known for his collaboration with such bands as House of Pain and Limp Bizkit. Now about media. At the time of the first rockers of Latvia, the Forbidden Radio played a big role. And on local Soviet radio, rock music could not be heard until the late 80s.
But since independence, there are appeared radios like, for example, NABA or SWH Rock, where logically plays the rock.
Of course, appear music TV channels and also forums in the internet, sites about music and sites of music bands, also communities in social networks. All this simplifies start for young musicians.
Latvian rockers actively touring. Their talent is recognized outside their homeland.
Traditionally, this is a neighboring Estonia and Lithuania, as well as Scandinavia, the USA, Poland or Ukraine. Rock music does not stand still here, and it has a lot of fans here, and I find it remarkable.
Also, among the famous and unusual bands born already in independent Latvia, for example, Autobus Debesis 1998.
The leader of this band is Marts Kristians Kalniņš, which in addition to cooperation with other rock bands, like band Melo M, known for his participation in rock operas. Now some bands of modern Latvia: Predict, The Sound Poets, Sigma, Rigans, Olive Mess, The Hobos, Velvet Supernova, HVAC, Sound Arcade, Dabasu Duorovis.
And this is not even 1% of Latvian modern and glorious bands that have chosen own way in rock music.
And as epilogue, in the summer 2016, here in Riga, Latvia, I was able to visit with my friends, pioneers of heavy sound, Black Sabbath.
And I caught myself thinking, could this band visit Latvia in the 70s? Of course not. Even in the 80s it was almost unreal. But now it's 2016 and here they are, right here, to make the dream of generations of Latvian rockers and not only come true. This is how rock part of Latvia looks like.
The country where appeared first rock band in Soviet Union, which has its own Liverpool, and talented musicians from the countryside, not less than in the big cities. Well, bye friends!